And you'll soon realize that the pledge isn't the only mechanism in schools representative of the elite's preference to keep people as blindly loyal, obedient, and closed minded as possible. Stay tuned to learn more about this preference from my next video regarding what schools teach us, and more importantly, what they don't teach us. That is the perfect segue into the next sign. Sign number 2: American-centric education and exceptionalism. The American education system's refusal to teach in depth about other countries is completely and utterly repulsive. Do you want any evidence of this American-centric propaganda? Just look at how little Americans know about other countries. Look at how badly we fail at basic geography. Look at how we are so quick to dismiss other socioeconomic systems as communist or socialist. Many of us don't even know that healthcare is free in other countries, or that tap water is safe to drink in much of Europe. People from other countries become extremely derisive when they see how insular we Americans are. And that derision is deserved. Why are we so insular? Because, as you could guess, the education we receive is all about America, 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 and more America. Our schools only talk about world history, wars, foreign relations, and humanity's breakthroughs from our perspective, even if the other side's perspective may have been more truthful and righteous. They downplay our atrocities against humanity, such as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they completely neglect to tell us that the country that was nuked is now more of a democracy than the one that dropped nukes on it. They overemphasize our achievements, such as Apollo 11, but they completely neglect to teach us who put the first satellite into space or who put the first person into space. They feed us the delusion that America is the model that others are trying to replicate, even though America lags far behind many other countries in life expectancy and quality of life, among other metrics. Our history books consistently paint us as the most influential force for morality to have ever existed, even though A, that's not even close to being true, and B, the US has caused so much needless death and destruction throughout its history. Just ask the people residing on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean whose loved ones have died in explosions that our country needlessly initiated. Yes, some high school and college courses talk about world history, but as a whole, the education system provides us with textbooks on American history and a handful of paragraphs within them on world history. Is it any wonder why so many Americans view the US as the central main character of the story, while other countries merely exist as the ensemble? Looking back on it, that American-centric perspective made me think and say some things that I am ashamed of now. I used to think that the US did the right thing by dropping the nukes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II, because it wasn't just the history books that justified this by painting the Japanese as implacable, but as I implied before, the school system discouraged me from criticizing America. Even though, with just an ounce of empathy and 2 seconds of research, I could have denounced these war crimes because they resulted in the deaths of at least 2 full football stadiums worth of innocent people. And of course, the American-centric perspective made me unacceptably ignorant. If you're a British person watching this, you are probably not surprised to hear this. I first found out about the report written by William Beveridge when I was 22 years old. That was when I wrote my honors thesis, when I was able to choose my own subject matter. The same Beveridge report that you guys had probably learned about in your early teens, or maybe even before that. the same beverage report that is rightfully revered as much as the Constitution is here. And yet, if you were to ask a group of millions of Americans, one of them being myself, whether they know of the beverage report, I'd be a part of a very small minority. Once again, this is not an accident. By focusing almost exclusively on America, we are conditioned to believe that our way is the only way, and thus the best way of conducting matters. Just like with the pledge, the material, or lack thereof, encourages us to acquiesce rather than challenge because it only provides us with one perspective. Now, let me be clear. I don't think the people who originally influenced the modern education curriculum, just like the xenophobe who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, deliberately crafted it because they were so hell-bent on suppressing critical thinking and out to get people who thought critically. In fact, the man largely responsible for our modern American-centric curricula that schools emphasize today was Horace Mann, a staunch abolitionist who thought that his ideal model of education would decrease poverty and create people who meaningfully contributed to a functioning society. But even if the intent behind the American-centric education system wasn't harmful, the outcomes have been to an extreme extent. Over time, the mechanisms of the system that have served people in power the most, such as the repetitive rituals that heavily encourage people to follow directions without asking questions, are the ones that have generally stood the test of time. Because there is very little incentive for the people in power, particularly the rich, to mess with mechanisms like these because the submissive behaviors that they firmly establish in people fit in perfectly with the wealthiest citizens' quest to extract as much money as possible for themselves. In short, even if the system wasn't devised with the sole intention of creating submission and insularity, it has evolved in a way that promotes these vices because they have been so beneficial to the wealthy folks in power. And that's why we are stuck with performing the backwards ritual that is the Pledge of Allegiance and being fed grossly misleading material that is taught exclusively from one perspective. If you grow up conditioned to believe that there is only one way and that this is the correct way, why would you feel compelled to ask questions and demand better? If you grow up without knowing the alternatives, then how would you even know that they exist? Let alone juxtapose them to our ways so that we could improve as a country. The elites know that it is very difficult to make such realizations when our education system cultivates such rank tunnel vision. They fear that if their open secret ever spreads, we would realize how and to what extent they have devised and utilized this socioeconomic system to fatten their wallets at our expense. This realization would inspire us to rebel and demand change. Change that threatens their bank accounts. So why would they mess with what the schools are teaching and not teaching us? By the time the COVID-19 pandemic came around 6 years ago, and I began seeing how other countries were handling the pandemic from independent news sources, I began getting information from those sources more often. As I began to consume this form of media even more, I realized that there is a whole world out there that the schools and the media never even suggested was real. It was only then when I began to seriously question our way of doing things and consider alternative ways of doing things that other countries have championed for years. It was only then when I began to evolve as a person. It was only then when my dreams completely changed from what was widely romanticized, such as having a lucrative job, a nuclear family, a house, and an abundance of material possessions to what they should have been since day one, which is helping those who need help the most live better, sustainable lives. All of that is to say the following. When you start looking outside the bubble that has been meticulously constructed to restrict your curiosity, you will begin to realize that a much better world is possible.